to make a special note that there's a great deal of data that we ask you to submit that we do not report out on an individual basis. We just use that for analysis and kind of summary reporting. So we'd never report your clergy compensation. If you submit that, we don't share that information. We'll only share that with the conference, and then we'll only share it beyond that. We'll just use it to summarize reports and say, this is what in Hawaii, the average church who has a full-time pastor has a compensation package of X number of dollars. So much of the data is only used in that way. Let's see. So we have this whole list here. I know some conferences, conferences one uses some of your yearbook reporting, particularly your membership, to calculate your per capita or apportionments, or I know different places call them different things. So I'm not sure what Hawaii calls them or if Hawaii does this, but you all, if you do, you all know, and that data hopefully comes from the data hub, the data that you've submitted for the yearbook.
We don't use it for that, but we do use it to determine delegates to the Aha Pai'aina, our annual meeting.
Okay, and that's also used to calculate the number of delegates to General Synod at the conference level. So the conference membership determines how many delegates that conference gets. It's based on a proportion system. So if you're reporting accurate data, then your conference will be reflected accurately in the General Synod delegations. Churches who work with Church Building and Loan Fund or Cornerstone for grants or loans, they use the data hub, which the data hub is where we gather the data from you all. They use that to help verify applications. And I know also our, the New Church Start granting program also uses the data hub for some verification. So it comes back around to many different verification points. I know Mesa is working on a new local church profile system, which when you're looking for a new pastor for your church, you complete a local church profile. If you're using that profile system, and they're developing an electronic system, they're like in the very first stages of that. And the goal is to have it connected with the data hub so we can just pull data straight from the data hub into it. So you don't have to spend time going and trying to dig up what was our membership for the last 10 years when, you know, these, or what were our operating expenses? What were our pledges and offerings? These, I think I've never been a pastor, but I suspect that those are kind of important pieces of information when folks are deciding, is this a church that I want to go and help lead and shepherd? So we have, what do we have? What did I say? 12 reasons. And another reason that one of the conference ministers and one of our East Coast conferences, in a recent newsletter, he shared some of these with his churches, and he just picked his 3 favorite. And then he said, I would say there's a 13th reason. And the 13th reason is that our data is a reflection of the stories that we have. So while the data doesn't tell the stories, it reflects the stories of those people who left church, but they've returned because of your church. So that's reflected with your membership number. And I thought that was a really interesting way to look at it. But I would encourage you just to take a look there and see where you, what reason maybe resonates with you and why your church submits their data, or why you would like to see your church become one of those churches that regularly submits your data. We also, once you get into the data hub, you might have some questions about what certain fields are. We have a tip sheet here. This one is not pretty. It's very functional, but it just gives a brief description of every piece of data that we request. And Lori can probably tell you that there have been times when she's called me to ask Destiny, what is this supposed to mean really? And I will read back to her almost exactly what the page says, because that's the best description I have. So I would encourage you, if you have questions, start with that, because it might answer your question. And then Lori will probably, if you call her, she'll probably follow my suit and go read it to you as well. And then she and I will talk and come up with a better answer, perhaps. We have added a new frequently asked questions page. There's just a few questions there so far, particularly about the Paycheck Protection Program, if that should be counted and how that should be counted. And it should be counted as total income if it was a forgiven loan, because it basically was an income to your church. Do I report online and in-person worship separately? Yes, please do. And we have a whole page about how to do that. And we have that whole paragraph back on the beginning of this page also to kind of talk more about it. And you can see most of these frequently asked questions are about things associated with the pandemic, because these are the hot questions we're getting right now. So we are going to go back here to the yearbook homepage, and we'll talk a little about online worship attendance. So we are counting these two figures, counting that separately from in-person worship attendance, because they're very different numbers. And I'm sure some of you are probably seeing that in your churches. Maybe your church regularly worships 50 people when you're worshiping in person, but some of your Facebook views or your YouTube views, maybe you're seeing double that, because maybe folks are watching it twice. Maybe folks are passing it on to their friends and family around the world. Maybe, somebody's just dreaming about visiting Hawaii and they find your stream from your church and they're like, well, let me watch this. And I know some of you might just be experiencing similar sort of numbers, but because we know they're very different numbers and they measure different things. So in person, you're actually measuring the bodies that are physically in your church. And with the online streaming, we can't measure we can't measure the eyes that are on the screen. We can only measure the screens that are streaming it. So I know in my family, there are 3 of us that are watching a stream. And in some families, there are 1. And in other families, there might be 10. So that's why we're trying to keep those figures separate, primarily because they are truly apples and oranges. And we expect that many of our churches will probably continue doing some sort of online streaming as, we navigate through the pandemic and we come to the other side and learn how to live life, maybe sort of like we used to live last year. And so we expect that there might be many churches that will be doing in person and still streaming. And we want to capture those numbers, but we want to capture them separately. So this year we're capturing that data using a supplemental survey, which if any of you have submitted data in the last couple of years, you've probably done that. And it's not done through the Data Hub, it's done through a SurveyMonkey survey. But then if you provide us all the identifying information about your church, we connect that back to your church record. And we do expect in the future that we very likely will be doing an upgrade to the Data Hub to allow us to collect this data within the Data Hub system. And when we get that capacity built, then we'll be able to take this data that you've provided us through the supplemental survey for this year, for last year, and add it into the system. So we won't be losing it. We expect to continue to gather this probably well into the future. Does anybody have any questions?
I have a question.
Oh, go ahead, please.
So it's difficult for us we do everything through Facebook Live. Mm-hmm. And there are both members and non-members that join. Mm-hmm. But even some of our members do not join at that particular hour, but they do watch it later on in the day or later on in the mm-hmm. week. And so it's difficult for us to actually really tell which of the members actually watched it. And then we also have people from different countries who watch our services in their time zone later on in the day or later on in the next day. Mm-hmm. And so Facebook does give us a total view number. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know how I would report that.
Well, I will try to help you solve that, but I'm going to admit to all of you right now, I should have done this before. I don't have experience using Facebook Live. I don't have experience using YouTube because I am the data person and I gather the data. And this is brand new to me, just like it is to many of you. And I was scheduled to meet with our social media specialist very early in January to try to have her show me more of this using the UCC channel so we could actually see data. And she got sick and was out with COVID-19. So we didn't get to have that meeting, and we haven't tried to reschedule it because I've tried to be mindful of her needing to catch up on work. So I would encourage you to measure at some point in time, and our kind of overall, let's open up this document, recording and reporting online worship. And this is very vague, and it says that we're going to have an update for you sometime in January with more details on specifically how to do it. And that didn't happen because my colleague was sick. And we'll hopefully figure something out, but I'm like, we're like a month away from finishing. So what the suggestion is that we count 1 minute views, or if that's available, but if not, so I'm hearing from you that Facebook will just tell you total number of views. Our recommendation would be, if you counted that in the past, just use whatever number you counted. We know that this data this year it's going to be probably all over the place for many of us, just because it's new. We're figuring out how to collect it on our end. You all were probably mostly concerned with how to even just connect with your congregation and bring everybody together. So if you can count just the total number of views that were on that video, report that number. That would be absolutely appropriate. We wouldn't I wouldn't expect that folks are going to be counting the number the day that the service was, on Sunday or whatever is your usual worship day, for that sort of reason, that, folks aren't always watching it on the day of. And we don't want you just to count members. We want to know everybody who's attended, just like when folks come to visit your church and they sit in your worship space, you're counting them if they're a member or not. So we want to know who has participated in your worship. So I would say take that total view count. If you maybe going forward, you want to just do it every Sunday, you want to look at the view count for the previous week. That would be fine. If you want to wait and do it at the end of a month, that would be fine. From my perspective, the most important thing would be consistent. Like, decide how you're going to do it and be consistent. If you haven't done it for the past 9-10 months, has it been, and you're able to go back and pull that data, just pull whatever is available, the total views that you can see today. And I think that would be perfectly appropriate. And I expect that next year we'll all be our office will be better equipped to help guide you on how to do this. And you all will be more experienced on how to do it as well. Is that helpful? That was really rambly, I know.
Yeah, because our Christmas Eve worship service, when I boosted it on Facebook, was viewed, the number last I saw was 795 views.
Wow.
And so some of our worship services, regular worship services without a boost, can reach up to 300 or 400 views.
Okay, you take those numbers and compute that average together. And we know that many churches are going to, I don't know the size of your church when you're meeting in person, but we know many folks will be experiencing much larger online worship than they do in-person worship, just because the capacity to reach people is almost unlimited. I mean, maybe not in China. They're not able to stream our worship services. But the potential is much larger. So actually, I'm going to back up to our instructions that Lori gave you. You're going to need a few key pieces of information to get into the Data Hub. The first piece of information you need is your conference church ID number. I can tell you all of your conference church ID numbers start with 14, and then there are 4 more digits that come after that. And if you need help with that number, I'm going to volunteer Lori to help you with that, because she says that in her instructions. And she certainly has those numbers for you, but it's that your conference ID combined with your church ID. I want to make a special note for those of you who have submitted data in the past. The password to get into the system is reset every year don't use the password you used last year. And the instructions tell you what the new password is. It's not the same as it was last year or even the year before. We've had lots of confusion. So this year's password is right here, Yearbook 2021, all lowercase with no spaces. After you log in, you can change that if you would like. Another helpful thing to do before you get into the system to submit your data is if you come to the very end of the instructions, there is an online data entry form. And I would encourage you, and I suspect Lori would encourage you as well, and those of you who have done this before probably know that how helpful this is, to print this off, these last few pages, and fill them in for last year. So your number of confirmations, confessions of faith, the breakdown of your removals from membership, maybe even what your total membership is today would be helpful. We don't have that there because you don't actually enter that into the system. So this form is going to tell you, this is all of the data that you'll be asked to submit within the Data Hub. So if you can fill this out before you go to the Data Hub, it'll make your job a lot easier. And the Data Hub will be really quick and easy to do. A special note about ministerial support, this should be reported on an annualized basis. So if you had a pastor that served for 6 months, don't give us the accounting of what this pastor was paid. Tell us what this pastor would have been paid if it were an entire year. So basically, take the 6-month salary and compensation package and multiply it by 2. If it were 5 months that they served, take the total, divide it by 5 to get 1 month, and then multiply by 12 to make it annualized. And this allows us to do summary reporting. So when we like to do summary reporting, it's typically when folks ask us, oftentimes when they're looking for a new pastor, hey, what's the average pastor make in our part of the country for churches that are about the same size as us? So we pull this data and we assume that everybody has reported it as annual data because that's what we ask for. So if you're not reporting it as annual data, then it's throwing those averages off a little. So that's my extra special note about that. And then here we have the supplemental survey. This is all of the extra information that we collect through that SurveyMonkey survey, where we'll be collecting your online worship attendance. And there are a whole slew of questions. You can answer as many or as few as you like. And that's really true for most of this data, that it's not an all or nothing. You don't have to give us everything. If there's a reason you can't or your church doesn't want to, you certainly don't have to. So after you've completed this, then you'll want to go to the Data Hub. Hop right into the Data Hub here. And I am going to enter a church record. And you can see I've entered the username, and then I'm going to enter the password, which again is Yearbook 2021, and click Login. And I'm just going to go, this is, you're getting a behind the scenes look. This is what, when Lori calls me and says, Destiny, this church is locked out and can't get in. I come in here and I unlock it and I reset the password. And then I say, okay, their password's been reset. Here's their new password. And Lori says, all right, thanks. And then she tells you, and you get in hopefully on the first try, like that. So here we are, we're in the Data Hub. This is just a training site. Anything we do here is not going to be saved or recorded. So don't be alarmed as we're making crazy changes. And you can see the home screen is blank. When you log into the live site, there will be text on this screen. I would encourage you to read through it before you begin. And it just it reviews the instructions and just some of the important things, just to, hey, remember this, don't forget to do this. So I would encourage you to read it. And there is a note at the top in red text that says, please read this page first. So if you forget, if you at least read that, we'll be in business. So to access your church record, you just click My Church. I was working with someone today who they couldn't do anything. And it turns out they didn't read that first page that told them how to get into their record. They just clicked on Church Report, and that's not where you want to go. So we were able to get her straightened out and on her way. And she's like, oh, this is what it looked like last year. And I'm like, good, we're in business. So here we are on the main information tab of the church. You can update much of the information here. Anything that is not grayed out, so all of the grayed out information you cannot change. If it needs to be changed, Lori might be able to change it. You could let her know. And if she can't change it, she'll let me know and I'll take care of that. There are, I think there's just one thing on here that Lori can't change that might need changed. Make any updates here that are necessary. Maybe like, let's just change something. Maybe the website is wrong. It's maybe .com. After you've updated everything on this page, be sure to click the update button. If you don't click the update button, the changes you made will not be saved. And I would also like to encourage you, if you make any changes here, let Lori know so she can make sure her records are also updated. You can also update your address. And you can see you do have a little pencil icon to edit here. You should only edit if it's a typographical error. You shouldn't edit if your church has moved or you have a new mailing ad. Maybe your mailing address is now a PO box, or maybe it's going to the treasurer's home for some reason. Don't click edit in that case. You just click, because edit is, we maintain a history of addresses in the data hub. And if you edit the address, we don't have that history. So what you want to do, you just want to click add new address and follow through the prompts. It's a new mailing address and it's a PO box. And click insert and it will, you can see it's added it as your new mailing address. And if we toggle this to inactive addresses, you can see the old mailing address. So we've maintained that history there. Now, I think the reason most all of you came was, how do we enter our actual data? And we do that through the rest of these tabs. Membership tab, you can see this church, you can see their full membership history here. That's probably a little big. They were a church that appears regularly reported for many years. And so they have a good history of data built up. To add your new data, you click add new membership year data. And then you just, let me pull up our instructions kind of right here beside us. So you can see it follows right along. Additions, confirmations, confessions of faith, transfers in, reaffirmations of faith, and then it'll give you a total. So if you fill out the online data entry form, you'll be pretty golden when you come here to do this. So let's just play around with this for a minute. So maybe this church maybe had 15 confirmations and 2 confessions of faith and 5 transfers in, because by golly, who doesn't want to move to Hawaii, right? And reaffirmations of faith, maybe there were 8. And you can see every time I move to a new box, that total increases. And now removals, we'll say 4 deaths. We had 3 people that transferred out and 7 that was some sort of other removal. Maybe it was just somebody withdrew their membership or the church cleaned their rolls. And now you can see a new number has appeared over here. That's our new total membership. Perhaps that's not right. And maybe it's not right because our last year's membership, our 2019 membership, was not 328 because we didn't report our annual data. So that's not a right number for us. So we want to get our total membership to the correct number, which is 350. But we don't want to add an extra 6 people to our additions because they didn't come in through, like, we don't know why it's off by the 6, except that we didn't report last year. So we have this little adjustment box here that you can add. So we can just put a 6 in there and be sure you click your calculate totals button, and you'll see now it's calculated our total membership at 350. Now let's pretend that 344 is too high. Our actual membership is 340. Can you guess how we might make it 340?
-4.
Oh, we have a gold star math student. Look at that. That's how we do it. Don't get confused and say the adjustment is 350 or 340, because look what that does. It makes it 694. So we can also you would submit your baptisms, children baptisms, adults, and again, it calculates that total. once you've reviewed the screen and everything's correct, you click the Add button. And now it'll bring us back here to this main tab that shows us our whole history. And there you can see that data that we just entered. And oh, I do have an error. I only had 4 letters of transfer. Lori, I need your help. Might be what you want to do, but you can just take care of it yourself by clicking on that pencil. And that opens it back up for you. You can, what did I say it was? Transfers in, I don't even remember. Oh, but now that's not right. I don't have 349. I know I have 350. There we go. Now I've got what I need. And there we can see it's all corrected and good now. So that's probably the most confusing piece of the data entry, is getting that total membership number to be right. Are there any questions about that screen before we go to the attendance screen?
I have one transfer in who came in last year during COVID-19, but I have not actually received her transfer letter yet until this year. So do I wait till next year to count her?
That's a really good question. I would say count them when you actually added them to your membership rolls. So if you added them to your membership rolls before you received the transfer letter, I would say I would probably count them. And assume that, I mean, we hope that the church where they transferred out of is not counting them because, you know, you made that request last year. But I think let's not overcomplicate how you should count. And like whenever you updated that, whatever you would report to the congregation as your membership, if you would report that as last year's, then report it as last year's. And don't report next year then as well.
I have a question about email address. The person who used to do this is not available to do it this year. I think she used her own email address. We have a new email address for the church, but can I use my own email address so I can work on this at home?
You don't need your email address to submit your data. You just need your church ID number.
Okay.
And we would encourage you for the church email address for it to be an actual email address for the church and not a person, unless the church just doesn't have an email address, just for reasons like that. Or we've seen in the past before emails were too widely used and, you know, just like everybody had email, some churches didn't have an email address. So it might have been the church secretary's email or the church pastor's email. But then the problem with that is when they leave that position, nobody updates the email address. And so we think we're sending emails to the church, and it's really going to someone, you know, who's left the church and is serving a church maybe in Alaska. Okay, so the attendance data is going to work just like it worked on the membership screen. We click Add New Attendance Year Data. And if we have our handy dandy form here, this is going to be really easy to fill out because we already have the numbers. We're just copying them from this form into the data hub. So reminder, average weekly worship attendance, that's in-person worship only there. And so you would calculate that if your church only met through early March, you would calculate your average based off of those 10 to 12 weeks that your church actually met in person. So don't take those numbers and divide by 52, divide them by how many weeks it was. So it will be an accurate reflection of what your in-person worship was when you actually were in person. If you have questions about community engagement or church participants, I would like to invite you to come back to the yearbook instructions. I believe touch on this. And if you come to the yearbook instructions and come to the section about attendance, you'll see right here, if you have questions, please see the guide to yearbook community engagement and total church participants category posted on the yearbook webpage. So we'll click that link. It's going to take us right over here. And here's the yearbook guide that will help answer those questions for you, what we're trying to measure there. And basically what we're trying to measure there is total church participants. Now this one might be a little harder to measure this year since we've all been doing lots of remote worshiping and gathering. But total church participants is really, we're trying to get those number of folks who are active in the life of your church. So not just your members, which we've counted, not just those people who attend your weekend worship gathering, but those folks who are a part of, like that you would say are a part of your church. So maybe you have, maybe your church still does a church school, or maybe you do a weekly, some sort of weekly middle of the week service or youth gathering or children's programming that doesn't happen in conjunction with your regular weekly worship. And those folks don't come to your worship service and they're not members. Like maybe you have an active youth group that brings youth from other churches, other parts of your community. We would want you to count those as active church participants because they're participating in the life of your church. So we would expect the church participants number is going to be a larger number. It definitely shouldn't be a smaller number than your worship attendance. I suppose it could be a smaller number than your membership if your members aren't really all active in the life of your church. But it definitely wouldn't be smaller than your attendance number because those folks would be church participants. But we would expect you probably, the likelihood that you have more people who participate in the life of your church is pretty good. So we're just, and we know that's not a number that's necessarily like you can actually just count it because maybe you don't have, the records aren't kept that good. So you can just estimate that. And this is a new, we've just been tracking this one since 2016. So hopefully we're all getting a little bit better at being able to measure that. And then the community engagement number is those folks who have been served or impacted by your church. So this isn't the people who come to worship, but this is the people that your church impacts as some way. Maybe you have a food pantry and you serve 10 families from this food pantry and that total 50 people in those 10 families. Well, that's 50 people that you've had a community engagement number with. Maybe you, here's a good one. Your church has some sort of volunteer ministries with a nursing home. So those folks in the nursing home are part of your, like maybe 10 people come to something you do in the nursing home. Those people would be part of your community engagement. So this number is an even bigger number and it's even harder to measure. So I would encourage you to do your best. And if you're just like, I just can't do this, you can skip it. This document does give you several sort of ideas of people that maybe you should be counting in each of those categories. Please check here if you've participated in international mission, immersion, or service trips. So let's start filling this out. Our weekly attendance maybe was 52. We maybe impacted, we'll just guess 150 people, and we have 75 people who participate in the life of our church. We didn't do any sort of service trips or projects last year because it was 2019, 2020. Look, I don't even know what year it was. And then the Christian education faith formation, pretty straightforward. How many children actively participate? So, you know, the active participation might be they come once a month, but they come on some regular sort of cycle. So maybe that's 15 and our adults is 20, but our average attendance is a little lower because those kids don't come all the time because they're, you know, playing baseball or soccer in the summer. So maybe we're only averaging 10 and 15 adults. And then maybe we'll say this church doesn't have an active youth program. So we'll leave that blank. And then we just click add here. Oh, but look at that. You must put a 0 there. If you don't have it, that must be a 0. So you're going to see that pop up in places on this screen. If you don't have the data, if the data is not measurable because you don't have a youth program, then you have 0 participants in your youth program. And there we can see that data. All right, let's go to the finance tab. Now, again, just like with all the rest, you click add new finance year data. And you'll see on this screen, there are some fields that are grayed out that you cannot enter. Your OCWM basic support, and then your 4 special mission offerings. This is data that your conference office will provide to our office based on the actual money that they received in 2020. And then once we get that data, after everybody's done entering data, we just upload that straight into the system. And Lori can probably attest to that this is maybe an easier process than it was, say, 15 years ago when we mailed you papers and you filled everything in with a piece pen and paper pretty much. And we sat here and we did data entry on our end. So it's much less error prone, but that's data that's always been reported by your conference on your behalf. So your total income, another little thing to note, if you hover over these little eyes in the data hub, it'll have little pop-ups if you have a question that'll explain it to you. And in that tip sheet that we looked at, that's basically what these are. These are from the tip sheet. So this is going to be your income from all sources. If you have rental income, if somebody left your church money, your pledges and offerings would be included as part of this. If you have investment income, so I don't even know what would be a good number. We'll say 395,876, and maybe the pledges and offerings was 250,000. Other UCC giving, this is a new way of collecting some of this data. This is all of the giving that your church has given to any part of the UCC that excludes your basic support and your special mission offerings. So if you have conference per capita that you're sending to your conference, or association per capitas, that would be included here. If your church supports one of the UCC seminaries in some way, that money would be reported here. If you support
disaster ministries, disaster relief.
Yes, if you're doing any of the special appeals. Yes, if your church does a child sponsorship through the UCC. If you're supporting any Back Bay Mission, which is a mission in southern Louisiana, I believe. Any UCC related agency or organization that you're supporting should be reported here, but it excludes your basic support and those 4 special offerings that your conference is going to be reporting for you. So we'll say maybe that's $15,000. Other support is giving that your church has given outside of the UCC. So if you're supporting a local food pantry, if you're doing something with Bread for the World, if you're doing, I don't even know all of the possibilities. And you all probably know far better than I do your sort of church's mission outreach that goes beyond the life of the UCC. And so that would be reported here, and maybe that's $12,500.
I have a question.
Sure.
What if we donated to other UCC church? Does that include in that UCC giving?
Yes, that would be other UCC giving. Absolutely. Good question. Capital payments is the next one. This is going to be any capital expenses your church has incurred. So if your church took out a mortgage, this isn't going to be the value of your mortgage. This is going to be what your mortgage payments were. If your church put a new roof on and you paid cash because maybe you did a capital campaign fund and you have the money sitting in the bank waiting for this expensive roof to be done, that's going to be a capital payment. So that's bringing together any capital expenses that are actually paid out in the year, but not borrowed, unless you're repaying the borrowed money. So I don't know, maybe that's 45,000. I'm making all of these numbers up, so none of this is going to balance out. So any of you who happen to be accountants, I apologize. Operating expenses. This is another one that's sometimes confusing for churches. This is all of the costs associated with operating your church, and that includes your salaries, your pastoral, administrative, custodial, whatever salaries are your church pays out would be included here. Your heat, your printing, your internet service, all of it. And boy, wouldn't it be nice if all of our numbers were nice, round, even numbers in real life. Bequests, total amount that your church has maybe received from bequests in the past year. Deferred gifts, the total amount of gift annuities, trusts, and deferred gifts that will be received upon someone's death. And then if you have an endowment, what the total of the endowment is. And again, let me just be clear. This data does not get published. But maybe your church does, none of this applies to your church, so just leave it blank. And then this again, Lori's going to give to us, or I think you give it to us, Lori. I don't think somebody else maybe somebody else does.
Endowments has nothing to do with some of our other special funds, designated funds.
I would say no. This is one of those pieces of data that we've been collecting forever that predate me, and that we've been talking about. We need to update some of this because it's, maybe not the best way to collect the data because of questions like that. Like, should we be asking special funds? Because if somebody has given money I guess an endowment is probably a little different than a special fund. And I bet one of you can probably speak to that far better than I can, because I'm sure, but I'm going to say no on the special funds.
Okay. Our numbers in past years might be off.
And that, that happens a lot. Some churches will report what's in their endowment, maybe for 10 years, and then they quit reporting it for a couple years, and then they report it again. And it's just a matter of, some folks are like, we're not telling you that. And then somebody else comes along like, of course we'll tell you that. So, so we know that it's a little fluid number. So we'll click add, and we'll see that got added. So you see this screen does not make you enter those zeros like the membership and attendance screen do. And that's because we recognize that some of the financial data, some churches just aren't comfortable sharing. And so we don't want them to put a 0 if it's just we're not reporting this. We just want it to be left blank, because a 0 and a blank are very different measures of data. Any other questions here for finance? I see we're just about out of time.
Question, going back to the capital payments. Suppose that our church built a new parsonage, and the sale of the old parsonage did not cover the new parsonage. And so we were fronted some money by the foundation, and then we have to pay $791 a month for the next 15 years to repay that. Would that be capital payments, or would that come under operating expenses?
I would count that as capital payments, since that's really, it's going towards a capital. That money was given to you for a capital sort of expense.
And I have another question. We've just received a letter from the building and loan. And we have a unique situation at our church too. We have a person renting the preschool, actually from the foundation, but the loan had to be in our name. And so things have gone okay up until now, until we got that letter yesterday. And now we have to look into it. Suppose the loan payment to the building and loan is $4,000 a month, and that's what the preschool is charged rent for. But they have been paying the mortgage. Rather than, they pay us the money, then we pay the mortgage. It was set up this way by the foundation. So is this something we would have to take up with the foundation, or is this also come on, because we don't receive the rent money? So
I would say, like, this, the data we're gathering in the data hub isn't anything legal binding. Okay. I would say, like, keep it simple and keep that out of it. And I think that's just the route I would go, because it's not actually coming into you. You're not paying it out. I think that would make the most sense. All right. Well, since we're just about out of time, I'm going to make the ministerial support very quick. It works just like everything else. There, we're done. You just click through each category: full-time, part-time, full-time, yes. The category this is for our pastor, their salary, amount paid by another church. There is no other church paying any part of their salary because we're not like in a yoke or any sort of arrangement like that. We don't have a parsonage, so I'm going to leave that blank, but we do provide a rental allowance and the utility allowance. We don't do any like Social Security offset, but we contribute to their annuity. Again, I'm making up all of these numbers. We pay for part of their insurance. And then there are other expenses, like other costs, books, continuing education. Maybe we give them $1,000 to do that sort of stuff. And then their business expenses are $2,500 for their traveling and having to eat when they're visiting sick members and such. And then we just click add. And again, remember, this is annualized. And there we have it. The one last place we'll stop is the staff tab. This is your current staff that's recorded in the data hub. If this is not correct, you can see there's nothing listed here. You can let Lori know and she can fix that. And I'm sure Lori has a preferred way for you to report that to her. So I will let her tell you that preferred way.
Oh, just email me. That's best. So Destiny, from here, how do we get to the supplemental survey?
Oh, thank you, Lori. Yes. On the homepage of the Data Hub, which we don't see here because this is not our live site, there is a link to the supplemental survey there that you can just come back here to the homepage and click the link to it. Or it's also, I believe, in the instructions. So let's pull up the instructions. Supplemental survey. Right there it is. And you can see we have some little giveaways for some folks, 40 churches. It's really important, especially this year, so we can connect this COVID-19, the online worship attendance data to your church record, that you get this church, your identifying information. So really what we need is your church ID, your conference church ID number. If we have that, then we can link it up. But we also ask for the church name and location, so we can just do a double check and make sure that you entered the right number there. And again, these questions, I'm not going to go through this because I'll actually have to answer it, and then that'll put data into the system that I'll have to have my colleague remove. But it goes just straight through, just like the same order of these questions down here. And at the end, there's just I think there's a submit button at the end. And one other thing back in the Data Hub, after you've submitted your data and you've got it all in there, if you need a copy to be able to print and save for your records, it's important that you do this yourself, because Lori nor I have access to this report called the church report. Only church users have that access. So if you click on church report, it will take you to a new screen, and it's not very pretty, but it has all of your data. And right here, it's all years. We probably don't want all years. We just want 2020. If you want an old year, you can select it, certainly. But let's select 2020. And, oh, it doesn't work because this isn't live, maybe? I don't know. Let's, there we go. I selected 2019 because this is training. The 2020 isn't working properly. But you could just see, you could just print this screen, or you can click this little disk icon to save it as a Word file if you'd like to have a digital record. And then if you need to go back to the Data Hub, you just click that back arrow. Might have to click it a few times since we played around here. There we go. All right, do we have any questions? Well, if not, thank you all for joining us. I hope this was helpful to you. And will help you get through this without, needing Lori's help. And if you do need Lori's help, you all know how to reach her. Our office also has set up a yearbook helpline, and those details are in the instructions. If you can't get a hold of Lori, or she's on vacation or at lunch and you really need help, you can call us. Now, our hours aren't quite as accommodating to you. What? Oh, Lori changed. I'm like, no, we're not there at that early.
No, it's Hawaii time.
Yes, I see that now. I'm like, huh? Who changed that? So I know those hours aren't real convenient for you all, since we're by 10:30, we're wrapping up the end of our work day. You can certainly try to call us a little bit later. I think my colleague who answers that line is in an extra half an hour after that time. So you might still reach her even if it's a little late. If it's outside of those hours, you can certainly call and leave a message for her and she'll get back to you the next day. Any questions?
Sorry, I'm new to filling out this form for you folks. I came over from the Episcopal Church, and my controller and I are both going to be filling this out. I do the membership data, she does the financials. We have until March 3rd to just keep updating it. And at one point, do we hit final, or is it final on March 3rd when you guys take it all down?
It's when you click the, I think it's, let's see, let me come back in, add new or save. When you click the update button on each of those screens, it saves the data to our system. Okay. We take the system down for churches on March 3rd, I believe is the date. Lori will still have access for a few weeks after that because she has a whole lot more work to do. Once she gets you all taken care of them in there, she has a lot of other updates that she'll hopefully be making, or unless she's ahead of it and already has them all done. So she could certainly, if there's something like, oh, that was an error, she could certainly help you out with that. But once Lori's access is removed, like a week and a half or two later, that's kind of it. And there is no button to click to say this is final. If you've uploaded it, it's there.
Okay. Thank you.
And you can't, just a special note, you share that password with each other. So if you update the password, make sure that you share it with your controller. If your controller changes it, make sure they share it with you.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I was able, the total membership column now has the total membership, but the total membership published is 0. It doesn't publish anything. Okay. So I'm assuming that you all do it on your end.
Yes, that number is, we should have covered that. That's a great question. The total membership published is probably really something we shouldn't necessarily display for you all, because once we finalize the data on our end and we decide this is the data we're publishing, we record, we populate that total membership reported field with the total membership. And the reason we've done that is your church might look back at your record history and say, oh, this data, we forgot to submit data in these 5 years and we want to update that. And you can do that. You can provide Lori that data that's missing and she can update it, or I can work with her to get it updated so that your record is accurate, but we want to record that history that this is what we actually reported publicly. So if anyone comes back and asks us, we can be like, why this isn't what I saw in the yearbook, and because they made an update.
Right. Any other questions for Destiny? We all good to go? Yeah. Awesome. And I think this was helpful for Destiny also, because then now there's a couple of things she might want to consider talking to her colleagues about, maybe tweaking on the yearbook form and site. So I think it was helpful both ways.
Yeah.
So thank you guys so very much. Thank you, Destiny, for taking time out of your busy schedule to help us. So thanks, guys. Take care. And
thanks for joining us.
Let me know if you have any questions.